Hello and welcome to the Metal Pack Pod, brought to you by the Metal Packager, the essential resource for metal packaging professionals. The Metal Pack Pod is the only podcast dedicated to metal packaging. We'll regularly welcome an array of special guests to discuss the essential issues affecting the industry. My name is Alex Fordham, and joining me on episode 1 is Robert Fell. Robert is CEO of the Metal Packaging Manufacturers Association in the UK. At MPMA, Robert is responsible for the overall management of the association. He is a principal contact with the UK government and the voice of the industry, focusing on a wide range of industry topics. I managed to speak with Robert just before Christmas in what was a revealing session about the prospects of the metal packaging industry as we recover from the effects of COVID-19. I hope you enjoyed the pod. Morning, Rob. Thanks for joining us on what is a historic day with the rollout of the COVID-19 vaccine here in the UK. However, we'll come on to COVID later, although it's probably a topic we could discuss for several hours, although neither of us would like to, of course. But first off, I've got a few quick-fire questions just to kick things off with the podcast. Just one or two sentences will be enough just to get a flavour of your take on things. First off, what would you say the biggest challenge for the industry moving forward into 2021 is?
I think the biggest challenge is getting the recognition and credit it deserves as the ultimate circular economy packaging format that it is. We need the messages not only to be heard, we need them to be understood.
Will the international trade show survive post-pandemic?
I think ultimately yes, but as to when they come back on stream at full strength, I think the jury's probably out on that one. I mean, operating in a trade show, taking a stand, it costs a lot of money. You need to know you're going to have the footfall. And I think for a while yet, people are going to be very uncertain as to whether that footfall will come back in strength to make that investment worthwhile.
With regards to working arrangements, do you prefer the old or new normal?
I like the idea of the new normal, actually. We are very quick to jump in a car or jump on a plane. And I think what this period has shown us is that's not actually necessary, not for every meeting. And I think maybe a balance between face-to-face and virtual meetings might be a good way going forward. It saves people time and it saves on your carbon footprint as well.
No, absolutely. This is an interesting one. What would you say your favourite canned product is ever?
My favourite canned product? At the moment, I have a little bit of a guilty passion for some mushy peas that I found quite recently that I've not seen canned before, which actually are absolutely excellent.
No, that's fantastic. Interestingly, there was something you mentioned regarding the old and new normal. I was quite taken with your answer that you're quite comfortable with the way the world has gone with regards to new working ways of how the world is now operating. I mean, that's interesting. When I've been speaking to a lot of people within the trade, they've been sort of almost harking back to the good old days, so to speak, of jumping on a plane. I know it's time consuming, but it is an enjoyable aspect of the job going here, there and everywhere. But to say that you prefer the new normal, so to speak, is that something that the association has really taken into heart, and are you looking to try and innovate as to how you're now working?
I think to qualify, it's not that I didn't enjoy or don't enjoy jumping on a plane or getting in a car. I mean, it is always, particularly for a trade association, you always want to spend time with your members and visiting your members and things like that. But from a trade association perspective, in terms of, let's say, for example, committee meetings, we've got members literally all over the UK. And, it costs them a day to have a 2-hour or 3-hour committee meeting. And sometimes it'll cost them more than a day if they have to stay overnight. And therefore, one of the things that we found is that we actually get better attendance, a lot of committee meetings virtually, because it only costs them the time for the meeting itself. Now, certainly, once we can all meet together, we certainly will, and we'll want to have face-to-face meetings with our committees and things like that. But I think what we're thinking of is maybe every other meeting might be a virtual meeting, so that we take up less of their time, we expend less carbon, because obviously we're avoiding travelling where we don't need to. And I think if we do it well, it can be a lot more efficient and it gives people more time.
No, absolutely. I think that's the case, that perhaps it is a bit of best of both, really. That is the way that we need to see things. That getting on a plane just to have a meeting, and we're trying to market ourselves as the sustainable option. That to be sort of jetting off around the world left, right, and centre really isn't an option anymore. And that we do need to have that. We do need to have that face-to-face interaction, but we also need to have that virtual element as well, because it is far more efficient. So it's amazing how this industry has been seen as being a very, very conservative in its approach, but the pandemic has given us no other option but to try and innovate with how we're working and communicating with each other.
I think that's absolutely true. I mean, we're also enhancing our online presence. We realised very early on that it's extremely important to be as accessible as possible from an online perspective. So one of the things we're doing at this moment in time is we are updating our members area, which, although we'd updated the website about 18 months ago, the members area was sort of as it has always been. And to be honest, it's a little bit difficult to navigate, to find documents that you need and to actually get the information you need it in a timely fashion. So we're updating that. We're trying to make it a lot more intuitive, so that if you want to find out something specifically about, I don't know, tariffs or conflict minerals or food contact, whatever it happens to be, it's much easier to find it. And we're also increasing the content in the members area to make sure that members can find the information they need. On top of that, we're also redoing and updating our Canned Foods UK website and updating the logo and the whole look and feel of it. And this is our sort of consumer-facing offering for promoting the use of canned food, and it's been incredibly successful and growing in terms of membership and things like that, particularly interestingly for vegetarian and vegans. Why those groups in particular, I don't know, but it seems to, whenever we put out a vegetarian or a vegan recipe in social media, it seems to get a lot of interest and a lot of attention. We also run competitions and things like that to encourage people to think about canned food and to use canned food more.
That's an interesting point with regards to vegan and vegetarians. Is that because they're perhaps a little bit more sustainably minded themselves, so they're perhaps receptive to the marketing message that we're putting out there as metal packaging professionals?
That's a good question. To be honest, I haven't thought about it. It's quite possible. It may be also that because they're trying to find particular products that maybe are difficult to find fresh. I mean, things like banana blossom and jackfruit, things I have to be honest, I've never heard of until recently. These are things that you probably can't get in any other form other than in cans. So I think there's probably a lot of reasons, but we're delighted to have those groups so heavily engaged with us. And actually, it's sort of now when we think about doing recipes and new recipes and working with cooks and chefs to help us get new recipes on, we actually think about those communities to make sure that we look after them as well as just more general recipes as well.
So Rob, reading an article with the International Trade Press recently, you mentioned about how the association has really had to perhaps adapt and innovate like we all have during COVID-19. So perhaps if you could just share with us how the association has had to adapt during the past few months.
Absolutely. Well, obviously, as you rightly say, we've had to adapt extremely rapidly to the new demands and restrictions placed on us by the pandemic. And the most important thing for us was to make sure that it was business as usual with our members. But of course, everything very quickly had to go online. We've managed to continue all our usual committee activity and to continue to interact with our members. But of course, all that has been done virtually. But obviously, what has been very key is also to ensure that members were kept fully informed on all aspects of government policy and support that was available in relation to COVID-19 crisis. And since March, I think we've sent out something like 180 bulletins, all of which taking a lot of the information from the government and making sure that it's only the stuff that's relevant to the members. In addition, we've also seen that we have to improve our virtual existence and look at our online presence to make sure that we are giving members everything that they need and it's easy to find. So as I've already mentioned, we've updated our members area, we're updating our Canned Foods UK website, but also taking the Canned Foods UK approach. It occurred to us that premise will also work extremely well for supporting our general line members, so our paint cans and aerosols and all that sort of general line products. And what we are looking to do, and we will be starting it this year and hopefully launching it next year, is to create a new website offering called Do It With Cans, which would be to promote the use of metal packaging or metal packed products in the DIY and craft area. The premise is much the same as Canned Foods UK. There, the idea is, here are some wonderful products, food products packed in cans. If you use this great recipe, you'll get a great result. The idea we do it with cans is also, here are fantastic products packed in metal containers. If you follow this list of instructions, then you will have a great end result in whatever the project is you're working on. And I think what we realised is, what we're very keen to do is to try and support all areas of our membership in all the market areas that they provide product into. So this is a new idea for launch in 2021.
Yeah, no, that sounds interesting. I mean, would you say that there has been too much of an emphasis on the industry with regards to two-piece aluminium beverage cans and the likes of general line cans, food cans? There isn't quite the emphasis there that we're perhaps missing out on.
I think with aluminium beverage cans, I think the market performance has been so spectacular in recent times that when you're doing a lot of stuff on social media and you're putting out success stories, it's very hard not to use beverage cans as the example, because it has been so very, very impressive, and we're absolutely delighted that that's the case. We have had Canned Foods UK for quite some time, and with a lot of the interest that is growing about food waste and things like that, I think we're getting in a good place in terms of promoting the food side of metal packaging. So I think we felt that the general line side needed a bit of a boost, particularly as we start thinking towards 2023, extended producer responsibility and things like that. Metal should do very, very well, particularly metal paint cans, in the classification going forward, because obviously one of the joys with a metal paint can is that it's still fully recyclable, even if it's contaminated with dried paint. Therefore, we felt that if we could start promoting and reminding consumers about how good metal packaging is prior to EPR coming into force, then that could only be a good thing. And of course, brands thinking about what they want to do going forward and whether they want to, run the gauntlet of having materials as packaging formats that might attract poor classifications. If they're thinking of switching to metal, then they need to start thinking about it now, because there's pack testing, there's other things to consider. So they really shouldn't leave it till the last minute.
No, that's interesting. I mean, I'm curious as well as to what you think. People at the moment globally can't go on holidays, and there's an increasing amount of spend on individuals' homes, environments, gardens, kitchens, etc. Do you think it's about staying ahead of the curve as an industry, that perhaps the DIY industry and general line cans is a real untapped potential there? Because certainly next year and moving forward into 2021, 2022, that there's going to be an increased amount of spend in people's homes, because they're going to have to utilise their homes that they've spent money on. So perhaps the DIY market is something to consider.
Absolutely. I mean, we're already seeing a large amount of growth in DIY during the pandemic for all the reasons that you've outlined. Particularly people on furlough and things like that, they have had to keep themselves busy, and why not redecorate the room, or redecorate the house, or work in the garden? So I think it is an area of growth, and it is certainly an area that we want to support very, very vigorously, because the metal pack has such a lot to offer, and it is such a good product.
No, absolutely. And also, I've been doing some research recently where Ball's CEO Robert Hayes mentioned that the industry is set to see growth up until at least 2025, with 3% growth year on year. I mean, they're really impressive figures. Do you see the last year or so as an outlier with the increase in popularity of metal containers due to the increase in consumption at home because restaurants, bars are shut, etc.? Or do you think those figures really do stack up, that we're going to be seeing really decent growth up until at least 2025?
I think if we look at beverage cans first, I think the growth was already happening anyway. We already were seeing a nice amount of growth with beverage cans. I think the industry can be very proud of its track record, particularly in its decision to start supporting areas such as craft beer. I think that was a masterstroke. And from that has come a lot of other opportunities. We're seeing a lot of growth in wine. We're seeing growth in cocktails and other areas where perhaps brands and fillers have realised that the sector is now prepared, or is now capable of looking after, shall we say, shorter runs than they had perhaps traditionally. So I think beverage is on the rise anyway. I think it's certainly got a big increase during the pandemic, There was clearly a move from keg to can as people couldn't go to the pub and things like that and couldn't go to restaurants and things like that. But I think the growth that we've seen during the pandemic, yes, is in part due to the crisis, but also I think for beverage cans, the growth was there anyway. I think if we think about food cans and other forms of packaging, I think the pandemic did give them a boost in the arm. I mean, with food cans, as we know, food cans always do well in a crisis. They offer the very best combination of shelf life, convenience, quality, and value for money, and food security, in fact. So I think the COVID-19 crisis has been no different. We've seen huge rises in demand for all canned food to the point where our members are running at absolute capacity. The interesting question is what will happen next, and that is much debated. Do canned food sales drop back to pre-COVID levels, or will they settle somewhere between there and current levels? I think the question hinges on whether the enhanced sales come from the same people who always buy cans, just buying more, or whether, as it is hoped and we also believe, that the uplift comes in part from new purchasers being reacquainted or using canned food for the first time.
What's your gut feel?
I think my expectation is that we will end up somewhere between the current levels and pre-COVID levels. Where exactly the curve will end, I don't know. But I think the combination of people being reacquainted with cans and realising how good they are, and also more and more products being packed in cans, I think we're going to see some growth maintained post-COVID.
Is there a danger, though, that we perhaps preach into the choir? I mean, as we chat now, that's something that I'm always mindful of, is that 3% growth up until 2025. Now, that sounds great, but does the average punter on the street, do they know that? I mean, is there ways that as an industry we can be better to be getting that message across?
I think it's always been a challenge to get the messages out beyond the sector. You're absolutely right. We are very, very good at preaching to the choir. It's very important to keep the sector well informed, both metal packaging and generally packaging sector. What is more challenging is getting the message out and the narrative out further to contact new groups and speak to new stakeholders. And I think that's why we're so pleased with things like Canned Food UK. We also, obviously, with MPMA now have Can Makers, which is our beverage can arm, which looks after and again is often typically talking to the consumer and trying to promote beverage cans. And that's why we wanted to do it with cans to the portfolio, to then again try and get the message out further to DIY and crafts market and people involved in that. And of course, these things cross-fertilize with each other. So, a success for any part of the metal packaging sector is, I believe, a success for everybody, because it just reminds people how useful and how valuable cans are. So I think a win for one is a win for all.
Do you think there's a danger that perhaps the narrative is changing? I mean, the last couple of years when I've been to trade shows globally, it's been about making sure that the consumer knows what recyclable and recycled means, and there's about sustainability of cans, that it's infinitely recyclable. But we're seeing a lot of this whole perhaps great reset message where CO2 emissions, carbon footprint, they seem to be becoming more and more important issues in society, and also that consumers, particularly young consumers, are finding more and more important. Is there a danger there that we're behind the eight ball on this message?
I mean, I think we have fantastic messages and we have a great story to tell, but I do believe that we do have to modify our narrative slightly to better explain just how metal packaging contributes to reducing waste of all types. I think we have to go beyond, shall we say, a clinical explanation to one that is a bit more emotive and describes the benefits and the absolute necessity of metal packaging in ways that capture the imagination of all stakeholders. You're right, we need them to understand the ultimate benefits of using metal packaging. And a very, very good example is food waste. People are quite rightly worried about food waste. They may not always realise it, but of course, when food does decompose, it gives off methane, which has a global warming potential of well over 20 times that of carbon dioxide. So it's incredibly important not to waste food and not allow it to spoil. The other thing, of course, is people are worried about natural habitat. Now, our population at the moment, about 7.8 billion around the world. by 2050, it's going to be something like 9.8 billion. On top of that, we're already wasting, according to the United Nations Food and Agriculture Group, we're already wasting about a third of the food that's produced for human consumption every year. Now, to feed that population growth as the years go on, we've really only got two choices. We either grub up more natural habitat to produce more agricultural land, or we stop wasting food. And clearly, by far, the best approach is to stop wasting food. And one of the ways you can do that is to actually use food cans. There's a very, very impressive piece of work produced by Delaware University that was commissioned by one of our members, Crown Holdings. And it was basically looking at how much food waste is currently avoided in the United States by their current use of food cans. And it calculated that something like 340 million litres of food waste per year is avoided in North America and Canada just at the consumer's level by their current use of food cans. Now, if you extrapolate that to the number of food cans sold globally, you get to over 1 billion litres of food waste avoided just with the current level of metal food cans used. And so we can't even begin to imagine how big that number would be if you had the data for the whole supply chain and not just at the consumer level.
Staggering figures, aren't they? I mean, how do you think as an industry we can take the lead on this issue then?
Again, I think coming back to my earlier point, I think we have to modify our narrative to get people to understand, rather than just the clinical facts and figures, the implications. We cannot lose any more natural habitat. We've lost so much, and people won't necessarily, there's no reason why people will connect loss of natural habitat with food waste or avoiding food waste, but actually it is very, very closely linked. We need to avoid wasting food, and using food cans is a very, very good way of doing it, predominantly, obviously, because of the shelf life. And of course, the joy of it is you packet source, and then it doesn't matter how long it takes, in relative terms, to get that product to the market, because you've got 2 to 3 years shelf life anyway. And of course, the other thing we mustn't forget, and we also have to make sure the consumer understands, is the nutritional value of canned food is also excellent. And from the point of being filled, processed, that level of nutrition is maintained without the need for preservatives.
That's an interesting point, actually, because one of my guilty pleasures for me and my wife is watching cookery programs. And I can't remember the program off the top of my head, but the interesting thing was they did make a reference to making sure you buy fresh as opposed to canned. So, and I was thinking, watching this program as being in this industry, saying, well, that's an interesting take on things. Do you think that message about the canned freshness still hasn't resonated and penetrated through to consumers' mindset?
I think it's getting better. There has been quite a lot of work done now about showing that actually canned food is very, very good from a nutritional point of view. And quite a few cooks and chefs do actually refer to it as maintaining its nutritional value. Obviously, there's the odd exception. Some of the more soluble stuff, like vitamin C, does tend to get reduced by the canning process. But for the most part, things are maintained well. But this thing about fresh, it can be a little bit of a red herring. It's absolutely true that if you go down to your local allotment or you go to your local farm shop, fresh means fresh. But of course, in the supermarket, fresh food may have been in cold storage for 8 to 10 weeks. And obviously, with fresh food, the nutritional value does start declining from the point of being picked. And therefore, some of the studies have actually shown that rather than freshly picked fresh produce, typically purchased, inverted commas, fresh produce often has less nutritional value than canned and, to be fair, also frozen products. So I think it's a message that's very important for people to realise.
And again, I think there's a few issues that we've discussed today where we have the message, but are we communicating those properly? So would you say that it's a topic that I think we've discussed in detail before, but do you think that we need to be a little bit more aggressive as an industry with regards to our marketing message, or the whole gentlemanly fair play thing seems to crop up quite a lot within this industry? So do you think we need to get on the offensive with our social media marketing messaging?
I don't think being aggressive helps. At the end of the day, we're talking about a supply chain that is material agnostic. The brands and the retailers buy products packed in all forms of packaging. And the last thing they want is somebody down the supply chain having a go at one or other format. It does them no good at all, and they're not going to be very pleased about it. That said, I think what we do have to do is we do have to be stronger and firmer with our messaging about the good size, about how good metal packaging is, and also about the overall benefits, rather than just talk about we've taken this much weight out or what have you, which is absolutely true and it is important to share. It's really about looking at the position overall. Because one of the problems is a way that a lot of the analysis is done, if we take, for example, a typical LCA, it doesn't take into account all the things that really, really matter. It doesn't take into account storage. It doesn't take into account, I mean, again, I know we've been talking about food cans a lot. It's a good illustration. If you take, for example, a product that you want to heat to 90 degrees C, let's say to a serving temperature, a tin, you're going to be heating it from ambient. If you're heating it from the fridge, you're going to be heating it from 4 degrees. If you're going to heat it from the freezer, you're going to be heating it from -20. Even from 4 degrees compared to ambient, it's costing you 15% more energy to heat that product to the serving temperature. Now, that 15% more energy is also 15% more carbon. And that is even before taking into account that the chilled product has been stored throughout its existence under refrigeration, which has a carbon footprint to it. And so it goes on. And I think what is absolutely crucial is to make sure that the holistic benefits of metal packaging is understood. You know, where I'm sitting, and I'm sure you're the same, I'm surrounded by products that have metal in them. And this metal, there's going to be parts of it that have been used hundreds of times before, and for any number of previous lives as to what that metal could have been used for. And again, I think we need to remind people about the fact that something like 80% of all the metal that's ever been produced is still in use today. And these are fascinating facts that also illustrate just how important metal is and its circularity. The fact that when we say metal recycles forever, we absolutely mean it, because it's absolutely true.
No, absolutely. I mean, it ultimately boils down to that simple message, doesn't it? That metal is infinitely recyclable and there is nothing better, really. So I think it's just trying to get that message across to consumers in some clarity, really. I think that sometimes the message does get distorted with, I mean, we're not going to touch upon it today, but the likes of DRS, where is metal compared to plastics and glass, etc. The material is just banded together as a packaging source. So there is some challenges there, but ultimately it is getting that simple message across to consumers who I think are intelligent enough to understand that message now.
Absolutely. I think, but it is important to share with them the messaging and also to present it in a way that, if you like, resonates with them. And sometimes you have to think a little bit out of left field to do that. So, for example, this year we ended up doing a joint project with a fantastic conservation charity called the World Land Trust. World Land Trust basically, through donations, actually purchased land in areas where there are problems. So all around the world, where habitat is under threat, they buy land, they create animal corridors, they increase the size of animal reserves and game reserves to protect the natural world. They are a phenomenal charity, and we decided that it would be great to be able to support them, but also in a way that helped us get our messaging out as well. So we jointly produced a stainless steel double-skinned refillable water bottle. The bottle is primarily to promote the World Land Trust. They sell it on their website and they take all the profits. But just on the front face of it, underneath the World Land Trust logo, is a very large, prominent Metal Recycles Forever logo. And that was absolutely deliberate on our part, because that means that all the supporters of the World Land Trust, and they have some 15,000 people on their e-newsletter listings, they get to see that logo and hopefully start thinking about the fact that, given the fact that the World Land Trust were happy and were prepared to have that logo placed very prominently on a product that they were using for promoting themselves, is a very, very good endorsement of that message.
No, absolutely. I just want to just move things on a tad. I know we've had a few months where we've not had to chat about it as two Brits. It's been quite refreshing that the message has been under the surface a little bit, although it's come back in the last few weeks. But just for our international listeners, with regards to Brexit, can you just give a brief overview of where we're at and the potential impact for the can manufacturing industry?
Certainly. Well, as we all know, negotiations appear to be going to the wire. And the outcome, certainly as recently as this morning, still remains highly uncertain. My understanding is there are three key issues: fisheries, what's called the so-called level playing field, and then the governance related to that level playing field. And the problem there is the tension between the level playing field and the governance of it, and I think what the UK government see as a sovereignty issue. So I think that is providing a particular political challenge for the negotiators. I think the problem is, and what a lot of people forget, is irrespective of whether a deal is struck or not, given that we're leaving the customs union, business with Europe will significantly change on the 1st of January. And we're going to have significant challenges around customs, where you're going to have customs declarations, both exiting your own market and entering the European market, or entering the UK market if you're exporting from Europe. Product marking is also going to change. Where in the UK, we're going to have a CA mark, and in Europe, obviously, it's a CE mark. It's also going to affect IP and trademarks and a whole host of things. And also the movement of staff in particular is going to be quite challenging once we leave the European Union. And of course, on top of that, there's the whole question around chemicals, REACH and REACH UK, where there still seems to be absolutely no clarity. From a trade association point of view, obviously our job is to keep members fully informed, well, as fully informed as possible, as the situation continues to unfold. We work regularly between members and BEIS, trying to make sure that they have the absolutely latest information. We've organised a couple of webinars where BEIS has presented directly to our members. But of course, they can only tell our members the information that's currently available, and there's still so much that we don't know. And I think that's what's absolutely of critical importance, is getting the final answers to everything as quickly as possible, because there are a lot of concerns that industry is going to struggle. We take our own industry, for example. Of course, if you go back a few decades, the integrated factory everything was on one site. You had printing and coating, you had component manufacture, and you had assembly all on one site. Now we have centres of excellence, we have economies of scale, and therefore we have different things produced in different parts of Europe. So the traffic across the English Channel in both directions for metal containers and componentry is enormous. So the concern is, with obviously new customs arrangements and potential for customs friction and delays, how that will be affected.
Do you think it's a little bit of political posturing where these debates often go down right to the wire? Do you think a gut feel is, will a deal be struck?
In all honesty, I don't know. It's too difficult to tell. I think there are some genuine problems. I think the one about the level playing field, governance and sovereignty is very, very difficult, because these are political issues. I think technically solutions are possible, but it's whether the politicians are prepared to move on both sides.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting point. Rob, it's been an interesting chat today. We've spoken about the delights of Brexit, COVID-19 and mushy peas. That's fantastic. No, great stuff. Rob, it's been a pleasure. All the best, and look forward to chatting to you soon.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Well, that was a revealing podcast about the impact of the past 12 months, I thought. I think the session really shows that how, despite it being such a tough year, the fact that metal packaging has such a strong message and the undoubted increase of consumption during lockdown, particularly in the beverage can sector, has meant that metal packaging has really thrived. I was really taken with the association's approach to targeting the increasing trend of general line DIY cans. And if the organisation can mirror the success of the food can, it means that I don't doubt that general line cans will really see a boost. However, the issue of preaching to the converted really resonated. How do we as an industry ensure that we communicate efficiently? And how do we drive the debate in terms of food waste? Please be sure to like the pod and connect with us on social channels. For those that haven't yet subscribed, please visit metalpackager.com/subscribe. Thank you very much.